a psychiatrist that just joined the Department of Psychiatry here and is now the third member of the team with Dr. Fisher and me. So welcome, Priya. So thanks for joining us here too. Let's see, I think we'll go ahead and share our slides.
Absolutely.
And
presentation mode, there we go.
There we go. All right. So the good Dr. Fisher and I will kind of tag team it here. So this is kind of what we've been asked to talk about. So I would encourage you, we're going to throw a lot of spaghetti at the wall, a lot of different ideas here. And so don't be overwhelmed by them and don't try to memorize or remember everything. What I would encourage you to do is sit back, relax, listen for maybe a couple of ideas that resonate with you in particular, you know, because everybody's different. There's no one size fits all. All right. And again, I'm starting here, Sarah, I think for the first handful, as I recall, right?
You got it. Yep.
Yeah, great. So lots of things get in the way of this otherwise joyous season, right? We just had Thanksgiving last week, and we have, of course, the winter holidays coming up here in a month. And it's, you know, we think of it as a real joyous time, and most of the time it is, but not always. You know, lots of things going on, cold weather and, you know, shorter days, of course, shorter hours of daylight. So there's separate from this talk, you know, we have to be mindful of the fact that seasonal affective disorder or the winter blues does happen for some folks. But other things, you know, are really more kind of psychological, like the expectations that we put on ourselves to make this a magical time for our family and friends. Spending time with family, usually a good thing, but what if, you know, what if there's some family conflict? I think every family has some degree of, you know, conflict or drama somewhere along the way in the family tree. You know, the logistics can be really challenging, whether you have to travel or not, but just hosting large groups. And, you know, what if you're grieving? What if this is the first holiday season when you're missing someone? That can be kind of a rough time. Dr. Fisher will get into the money aspects of this in some detail, because I think that's a non-trivial issue, right? We have a tendency to overspend because we're trying to create that perfect Christmas or that perfect holiday, whatever holiday you celebrate. Traveling, which again is, I think air travel is kind of a contact sport anymore. It's kind of a challenge. What those of us that you know, in the professions like all of you, you know, what about who's covering, who's minding the store when you're gone? And so you have to go hat in hand to ask somebody and so forth. But then sometimes you feel guilty if you don't take time off. So all kind of a hodgepodge of things here, right? Let's take a look at the next slide. And so really, I already said this, but I'm going to say it a couple more times. You know, a lot of this is really self-imposed. These are expectations that we put on ourselves, maybe not explicitly, but you know, things that expectations that we develop over the years. It may be because of the way you were brought up, and you might have had that picture perfect, you know, holiday season from you know, parents that, you know, decorated the house, and you have the showstopper house for the neighborhood, and maybe your mom baked, you know, dozens of cookies for everybody around, and so now you feel like you have to recreate that, and if it isn't 100% like it was when you're growing up, you failed in some way. And that's not really true, but a lot of these expectations really are things that we just sort of don't challenge. We just sort of think they just sort of hit you, and you just kind of think, I've got to do it this way. Next slide, please. So really, you know, happiness is really this thing. It's this sort of equation that looks at the expectations, but also the reality, and trying to balance the two. You know, happiness, or maybe contentment is another word too, that I think is underrated. The more I get into kind of this wellness gig, the more I think that maybe happiness is not always what we should be striving for, but maybe more contentment, which is a little different thing. But I digress. So here is, you know, some information from the Mayo Clinic. As one of my mentors used to say when I was a medical student, he referred to it as the world famous Mayo Clinic. So here's their advice for surviving the holidays. So first of all, acknowledge your feelings. If you're feeling kind of low or feeling kind of blah, or just not so enthusiastic, that's okay. Acknowledge it rather than just sort of stuffing those feelings away or saying, I shouldn't feel that way. You know, reaching out to people. A lot of this is about maintaining and fostering social connection, because that's super good for all of us, as you know, and super healing. And sometimes when we get feeling blah, we kind of pull back socially. So don't let that happen. Seek out virtual community, like say, whether it's, a faith community or some other group that you care about, including this very group itself. I love the fact we started the meeting with talking about, I guess, a form of volunteerism where you're thinking about someone else. You're thinking about the Child Saving Institute and things like that. I think that's a great thing to do when you're feeling kind of blue, is think about others in need, because there are lots and lots of folks all around us that are in need. And sometimes that's a good way to get to feel better about ourselves, is helping somebody else. Setting realistic goals, and we'll get into that more, especially the financial piece. Setting aside differences, easier said than done, but I'll give you a little tip here in a minute on one strategy that you might find helpful. Routines, keeping up healthy routines, I think is super duper important. Whether it's trying to get enough sleep, getting a bit of exercise, that sort of thing. What if you're deep though in the middle of, say, a family get together and things are getting a little stressful? Take a break, get away for a while, get outside, even if it's a 5 or 10 or 15-minute walk. If it's nighttime, getting out and looking at the stars, kind of is a great mindfulness thing. It gets you out of your head for a little while. Clearly, soothing music is one of my favorite things to do, I think, and reading a book. And incidentally, I mean, I read ebooks too, but I think there's some value to like go back to the old school, actually like a book, where you get your eyes off a screen for a little while. Read something for pleasure. That's just another thought. Next slide here. So self-care, that's one of the big things that the three of us in the wellness team promote all the time, is self-care is not selfish. Nobody can do this for you. That's why we call it self-care. So, physical activity of any sort is really one of the best things you can do to keep your spirits up and to keep your body and your mind healthy. As you know, the general recommendation is trying to get 150 minutes a week. That can seem really daunting if you're not doing that, and maybe you've gotten out of your exercise routine either because of the time of year or the pandemic or who knows what. And so sometimes we don't start things because the difference between what we're doing now, or what we're doing now down here, and what we used to do is so big. That gap is so big, we just don't start. I always tell people a little is better than none. 5 minutes of walking is way better than 0 minutes of walking. Sleep is underrated. I think most Americans do not get enough sleep, and the sleep experts will tell you 7 or 8 hours a day is kind of the typical recommendation for most adults. Getting outside when the weather permits. And in this part of the country, yeah, we'll have some cold days, but for the most of the time, it's not so bad. And getting outside for even 5 or 10 minutes and getting some natural daylight can make a big difference. Especially a lot of the experts with I mentioned seasonal affective disorder say one of the best times to do it is early in the morning, like within the first few hours of getting up, if you can. But any time is okay. I'm a big believer in meditation and mindfulness, and we have all kinds of tools and tips on that. And I put in a pitch for the wellness website here at UNMC. So if you Google UNMC Wellness, it'll take you to our website. And if you poke around there a while, you'll find that we have lots of I think helpful information on things like mindfulness and meditation. And then journaling. I'm a big believer in that too. I keep a gratitude journal once a week. I write down 3 things that I'm grateful for. And there's a science to that the more we focus on things that we are thankful for or grateful for, and particularly if you put it in writing, not just think about it, but literally write it down maybe once or twice a week, the more it helps your brain focus on the positives. I don't know about you, my brain is really good at focusing on the negatives, around me, the aches and pains I'm having, or what have you, but you can retrain your brain to look for the positives. And particularly, I encourage you, like I say, to keep maybe a gratitude journal. Might be a good time of year to do that if you haven't done that already. And what not to do. So, doom scrolling is a thing, as you know. I mean, you've done it, I've done it. You get bored, and the first thing you do is pull out your phone. I'm as guilty of that as anybody. And just keep an eye on that especially with world events being what they are, there's a lot of negative stuff out there. You have to stay informed, so obviously you want to keep up with the news and you want to know what's going on, but you might want to keep tabs on your media consumption, especially if you're not feeling so hot. Self-medication, of course, is also a very real thing that this time of year we may overindulge in alcohol or overeating or certainly drugs of abuse. But again, I think one of the main things is media consumption. We sometimes don't always think of that as sort of like an abusable thing. All right, good Dr. Fisher is going to teach
Yeah.
us about financial wellness. Mhm.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So we'll get a little bit more into the specific financial wellness stuff. Just a warning, I'm not like an accountant or anything, I'm a psychologist. But I think approaching finances during times of stress is very similar to other types of goals in times of stress. And so there's definitely some cross applicable things here. But yeah, if you have specific financial questions, then definitely get some specific help with that. Let's see. So whenever we have any kind of goals that we're working toward, the first thing that we want to do is establish goals and priorities, right? So your financial priorities will change quite a bit across your lifetime, right? And that might be focusing on savings, retirement, paying off debt, including student loans, investing your money, supporting loved ones. If you are later in life and you have grandchildren, you might spend a lot of money on them and spoil them, that kind of thing. And so there's no right or wrong financial priorities, but kind of establishing what's important to you. What are your top 2 or 3 financial goals of this year or this 5 years, this phase of your life. And then really honing in on those, right? So kind of being aware and being thoughtful about where you're putting your money and why. So once you kind of know roughly what your priorities are, then we create specific goals for those priority areas. You probably heard this before, potentially, pay yourself first, right? So what that means is putting money toward your financial priorities before you kind of decide what you want to do with your discretionary funding. So as soon as you get paid, putting what you want to put into savings, into debt repayment, into investment, retirement, whatever your priorities are, but doing that right away. Because if you wait and try to do it later, then you might not be as diligent about tracking your spending. And so getting that out of the way immediately is a safer way to kind of manage your priorities. Track your progress toward your goals, right? That might just be you keep an eye on your accounts. It could mean a spreadsheet or an app or something. But really noticing when you've hit milestones and really celebrating, right? Like, hey, I fully funded my emergency fund this month. I'm gonna play a board game with my family, or I'm gonna watch my favorite movie, or doing something to really acknowledge and celebrate your successes when you're working toward your financial goals. Tracking spending, right? Again, none of these are like new ideas, but I think it's useful to have a reminder on the holidays because it's so easy to have your spending get a little out of control. So once you know what you want to spend on all the different categories of your spending, just tracking that, noticing any patterns, see if there's some things you want to change. There might be some things that you spend a decent amount of money on each month that you're like, you know what? That's worth it, right? That's totally fine too. But figuring out, again, what are your priorities? Where are you putting your resources? And do you want your resources to stay along that path, or do you want to change it? This could be spreadsheets, like computer spreadsheets. I think they also sell like hand ones that you can do that have like pre-printed categories on them. There's the envelope system. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this, but it's a cash only. You put the different categories of your spending money in envelopes, and that's all you get for the month. Again, they're like apps you can use. Probably the most popular one that I know of is Every Dollar. It's a Dave Ramsey thing, but there are lots of different like spending apps that you can look at. But again, it's just the act of tracking your spending can help you become more aware of where you're putting your money, and knowledge is power, right? So just tracking that a little bit more carefully just to see what your patterns are. Now, this is probably one of the most important things to talk about. Avoid avoidance when it comes to money. So I don't know about you, but I know I will sometimes pretend like I don't have a credit card balance, right? It doesn't exist. I don't need to ever look at it because it's not a real thing. And ultimately, that's a really fast way for it to get a little bit out of hand. Knowing what is going on with your money and your debt and your investments can only help you make better decisions, right? So even if it's a little daunting to look at what's going on with your money, reminding yourself that knowledge is power, and the more information you have about your finances, the easier it is to make good decisions, right? So knowing what your balances are, what your interest rates are, both for growth opportunities and for debt kinds of things, figuring out what your growth potentials are for your long-term investments and projections and that kind of thing. Because that can be really motivating, right? If you kind of forecast out your retirement 30 years from now, you're like, oh, that's a lot of money if I put this amount in it now. And so that can be very motivating. Or if I keep paying the minimums on this credit card forever, this is how much interest I'm handing over to this credit card company, right? So the more you know, the more you can make informed decisions about your money. There are many, many mental health factors that can make it difficult to gather this information, right? And feel comfortable doing so. Depression, anxiety, impulsiveness can come with a lot of different mental health conditions. Difficulty saying no to others, right? Wanting to support your friends and family and risking your own financial wellness in favor of that. Sometimes just dealing with stress, right? Retail therapy is very much a term used in our society. When we buy something and we acquire a new thing, that makes us feel good, right? We get that hit of dopamine. It's just like eating a piece of chocolate, right? It's not as powerful as a drug necessarily, but it is really powerful. And so just being aware of, okay, why am I purchasing a thing? Is it helpful to me, or is it actually harmful toward my goals? So once we have all our priorities sorted, it helps us think a little bit differently about our holiday budget, right? Because our holiday budget is the same as our disposable fun money budget. And anything that goes toward other priorities, that stuff is spoken for, right? So what we're working with is what's left over, that discretionary, disposable amount of money. Now, your priorities might shift during the time of year. And so if spoiling your nieces and nephews or your kids or whatever is really important to you, then you might plan to have a little bit extra toward your disposable income and a little bit less toward savings or whatever. But I would recommend keeping an eye on your savings goals still, and not completely getting rid of them for a month or two during the holiday season, right? Putting yourself first to some extent still. So creating a holiday budget can be very challenging, right? Sometimes we get into a mindset of, well, we're going to spend what we spend, right? Which is very easy to do, especially if you're building a young family, right? Or you are decking out your house for the first time, or, you've reached these young adult kind of milestones, and you want to go all out, and that's completely understandable. But then when we go over and January and February hit, we're looking at our budgets and we're like, okay, now we have to figure out what to do about it. So having a budget ahead of time to figure out what you're comfortable spending during the holidays can be really useful, right? So this is my Christmas budget. This is my New Year's budget, however you want to do it. This can be very general, right? So in December and January, this is the amount of money I'm going to spend on holiday stuff. It can be kind of semi-specific, right? So gifts versus everything else. It can be very specific categories, right? For each kind of thing you need during the holidays. However your brain works best, right? Whatever is going to be most useful for you. Looking for sales, obviously, that's kind of age-old advice, but if there are things that that might be useful for gifts or for your holidays ahead of time and they're on sale, that's always nice. One trap that we can find ourselves in is what's called self-gifting. So I definitely do this. I did this during Black Friday, right? Where I'm looking for gifts for other people and I'm just like, I could actually really use a new knife block, right? And it's almost 50% off. I can't say I regret it, right? But you do have to kind of be thoughtful about those kinds of purchases, because if you're constantly giving yourself presents, that can blow up your budget a little bit. Again, sometimes it's worth it, but you just want to be mindful about those decisions that you're making and trying to still fit them within your holiday budget. Which brings us to mindful spending. The biggest thing with mindful spending is just slowing down, right? So a lot of the time when we talk about holiday shopping, it's like frantic, right? Like, gotta get all the presents, gotta get all the decorations done. I have to have everything perfect and ready to go. And you will kind of impulse buy a lot of things, both mostly for other people, but also potentially for yourself or for decorations or whatever. And so find different ways to slow down, make a list ahead of time. That can be useful. I'm going to get one gift for each of these people instead of, just grabbing whatever I think they would like. If you're shopping online, one thing I like to do is put it in my cart and then sleep on it, right? If a day or two later, I'm like, no, I think I still need that, then that at least is a little comforting that it was still good. But, I'm not buying because I need a boost, I'm buying because it's actually useful. Asking yourself how you're feeling emotionally and physically, like, am I in a good place right now to be making decisions about money? Or do I need to maybe talk it out with someone first? Do I need a snack, right, to kind of help me regulate how I'm feeling? Am I looking for a comfort kind of boost from retail therapy? Like, how am I feeling? What's going on with me? Is there anything I need to do before I make a financial decision? Do I really need the 15-foot Christmas tree when I have a 12-foot at home, right? Or will the one I have do for now? Using cash or tracking spending in real time can be really useful. So using like a debit card instead of a credit card, or using cash if that's something that's feasible for you. Something that kind of helps you keep track of your spending. Because if you're just kind of using your card left and right, it can kind of, again, it feels like imaginary money, And so finding ways to be aware of what you're spending in the moment can be really helpful. Another trick, again, that you've probably heard before is to think about the hour value of an item before you purchase it, right? So for me, if we're using myself as an example, if I look at that knife block, right, and I say, okay, that knife block costs this much money. Here's how many hours it would take me to earn that much money. Is this worth, 10 hours of my time or whatever it happens to be? And so that can be a way to sort of contextualize your purchases in a way that is like, really what you're spending is your time, right? Because you're spending your time to earn money. Is this worth the amount of time that you would have put into it? Sometimes the answer is yes, right? I'm not saying never shop for anything, but just kind of being more mindful about that choice. If you're like a true shopaholic that really struggles with impulse control around spending, one thing you can do is after your holiday shopping is done and you have everything you need, right? And you don't need anything else, you can freeze your credit cards. Again, I don't necessarily recommend it. But if you were like, I need something to help me, just freeze them in a little block of ice. They'll melt pretty quickly if you do actually need them. And this is partly a bit of an exaggeration. Really, any barriers that you can put between yourself and mindless spending, right? So maybe your credit card is in like a safe that you have in your house, right? It's just an extra minute to get it, but having to go through extra steps to go grab it before you can buy something online can actually help you curb your impulses, right? So again, this is just depending on personal need. This is not necessary for everyone, but if you struggle with impulse spending, especially around the holiday, just create a few extra obstacles for yourself. Nothing insurmountable, right? But a little harder on yourself to spend money. Again, this is a little cliche, but don't underestimate the power of a handmade gift from the heart, right? These can also be a little tricky because you can spend a lot of money on supplies, but within reason, making things that are handmade, this can be crafts or photo collages or whatever, plan activities together, right? So my gift to you is we're going to go to this place or we're going to do this activity and spend quality time together. experiences can be a really wonderful gift to give. You can also give gifts that are small, but are particularly meaningful in some way, right? So if you give me a gift that's hilarious and it was $8, I'm totally cool with that, right? Or are particularly meaningful somehow, or are particularly useful to a certain person, right? That $20 pasta maker, right, attachment for a KitchenAid might be the best gift that someone gets, even if it's not that expensive, right? So really thinking about what would this actually, or what would actually mean something to this person? How can I make their lives better in some small way that doesn't require a lot of spending? The important thing to remember is we're not gifting to impress necessarily, right? We're not trying to like show how much we care about a person via how much money we're putting into their gift, right? It's more about the thought behind it. So kind of remembering the spirit of Christmas, I guess, is what I'm getting at. The spirit of the holidays, I should say. So this can be one of the more difficult things to do during the holiday season, is saying no and setting boundaries. So I want to start off by saying you don't owe anyone necessarily an explanation when you say no, right? You are welcome to say, no, I'm not buying all the supplies for the holiday dinner, or no, I'm not getting everyone a Secret Santa gift with a minimum of $150, or like you can just say, no, that doesn't work for me, and you don't owe anyone an explanation. That said, it can be useful to kind of explain your perspective just to help the other person understand where you're coming from. And so this is a really useful acronym to keep in mind when you're having to say no, ask someone else for something, or set a boundary with someone. And so this acronym is Dear Man. So I don't know if anyone here is ever in the therapy world, but this comes from dialectical behavior therapy. So the dear part of Dear Man is basically the steps of what you actually do. And then the man part is basically how you do it, right? So the D stands for describe. You describe the situation that you're reacting to, right? So, hey, I noticed in your group text that you want everyone to bring a minimum of $100 worth of food to the party, right? I'm just kind of pulling something out of nowhere. So you're literally just fact-based language to describe what's going on. So the E stands for express, and this is expressing how you feel about the situation, right? So if you're feeling uncomfortable or pressured or not listened to, or, you know, however you're feeling, whatever level you're comfortable disclosing to the other person, it can be helpful for them to understand why you're reacting the way that you're reacting, why you're saying no, or why you're trying to come up with some sort of compromise. Right? Assert is the thing that you're asking for, right? So being very specific, very concrete, understanding that the other person might have different priorities than you, and you can't assume that they are going to just know where you're coming from. So being very clear. So just saying like, hey, I can't do $100, but I can do 50, right? I can put 50 toward the potluck or whatever. Reinforce is telling the person what it would do for you if they were to kind of understand your perspective, right? So if we could lower the amount that everyone has to spend and just have food that's a little less fancy, it would make me feel really listened to and appreciated, right? Because I have my own goals that I need to pursue. So describe factually, express your emotions about the situation, assert what it is that you're actually asking for, and then reinforce, right? Tell them how that would help you or what it would mean to you if they help or if they listen to you. Now, the man part, again, is how we're doing this. So stay mindful means staying on track, basically. If they try to say, well, I spent this much on you, or if they say, well, you're making the most money out of all of us, or if they try to basically try to attack your position in any kind of way, it's okay to just stay the course, right? Stay calm, but stay firm. One technique that's really useful is the broken record technique. which is basically what it sounds like. You kind of pick a phrase that's calm and firm and simple, like, no, my max allowance for this is $50 this year. And you just say that over and over again until the person gets the point. Eventually, they will either get bored or get frustrated enough that they will just kind of accept your position. They'll understand that you're not budging, right? So the broken record technique can be really useful. This really helps with kids too. but yeah, this is useful for lots of different situations. The A is appear confident. So notice it doesn't say be confident, right? It says appear confident. And so if you imagine a confident person in your mind's eye, right? So like a upright body position, kind of a firm voice, not doing too many ums and uhs, not looking down at the ground, making eye contact, just doing what you need to appear like you're going to stay firm and confident. And then the N is negotiate, right? So there are some situations where you might be willing to give a little, right? And that's okay. So kind of decide what's acceptable to you. If you're both really firm and you can't do either end, then finding a middle ground, right? And working together to find a solution. But yeah, so this is sort of a shortcut for assertive communication. Obviously, it's easier said than done when it's just listed out like that. But this can be a useful format for talking to people because it's very like you oriented, right? You're telling the other person how you're feeling, what you're looking for. You're not using blaming language or putting it on the other person. You're just asserting your boundaries, right? And telling them like what's okay with you. If you ever want to look up Dear Man, I think there are tons of like articles and videos and handouts. And so it's a useful tool that is very widespread. And setting boundaries doesn't just have to be about finances, right? It can be, but you can also set boundaries around, controversial topics or things that can get a little argumentative around the dinner table at Thanksgiving or Christmas. Again, like Dr. Wingle mentioned, I think a lot of families have a little bit of conflict sometimes, or sticking points, or family members that just have different values potentially and can start difficult conversations. So one thing you can do is agree ahead of time to just not talk about certain issues, right? Again, if you're comfortable with that, but if everyone's on board, you can say, all right, nobody talk about politics, right? Or you can have like a code word, right? You can say like, okay, if we ever get to the point where a conversation is uncomfortable, we're going to use this code word to kind of shut down the conversation, right? So you can kind of work with your family to find an avenue that's going to work for everyone. But having some sort of plan in place for how you're going to handle difficult conversations. Some fun ways to limit spending. Again, I don't think any of these are going to be super new to people. One thing that we do in my family is we'll all create wish lists like on Amazon or whatever, and we'll share them with each other before Black Friday. So that way, if people happen to be able to get something on sale, then that's fantastic. Like we want everyone to spend the least amount of money possible. White elephants or secret Santas with spending limits, right? So having maximums as opposed to minimums for white elephants and secret Santas, especially white elephants because of the stealing thing. You never want it to get too extravagant with the gifts because then everyone will be fighting over one gift. But so having kind of reasonable spending limits that everyone agrees on. The buying gifts throughout the year can be useful, right? So if you are someone who knows your friends and family members really well, and you kind of see things that you think they would like for the holidays, just, during July or whatever, because you happen to be, at a place that has some good deals or something, that can help diffuse the cost across your budget. And it can be a little easier to absorb the cost that way. And so that can be something that people do. Splitting the cost of a bigger gift with someone else. I think siblings tend to do this a lot for bigger gifts for parents, right? Like, all right, we're all going to buy a lawnmower for dad, right? We're all going to split the cost. But that can be a fun way of, okay, this is from both of us. This way you get an awesome gift and we don't have to break the bank. So yeah, I think that's everything that we had specific to the finance stuff. But we'll have time to talk about it once we're done with this last little portion that Dr. Wendell is going to talk about.
So kind of on the fun side, I want to remind folks, if you're not aware of it, that we have an amateur orchestra and a choir. So the Nebraska Medical Orchestra and Choir, it should say, is active. And I don't know if maybe some folks in this group participate in one or the other. They're having a holiday concert, and I guess I came up with a slide with the date on it, but it got lost somewhere. It's going to be December 13th. At 7:30 at night. It's going to be at UNO at the School of Music. Stay tuned. We'll have something in the UNMC today about it. But just if you're interested, if you want to have a really fun free concert and maybe see some familiar faces up on the stage, it's really fun. So 7:30 p.m. Wednesday, December 13th.
Do the orchestra and the choir perform the same night, or are those separate
They do.
concerts?
Yeah, they do. They kind of overlap and they do some things together. They found some unique ways to do some fun stuff together. So
Cool.
yeah. And then, again, on a serious note, I always like to remind folks that if the do-it-yourself route isn't working, you're trying your best to get some sleep, get some exercise, do all the good self-care things, and yet you're still feeling just persistently pretty low or pretty anxious or whatever, employee assistance is there for you. It is, we work with a group called Arbor Family Counseling, a really good local group of therapists. And EAP is there for you. It's free. It is completely confidential. Your supervisor won't know. Nobody else will know that you're going there except for you and your counselor. And it's free. And incidentally, it's not just free for you, but it's free for members of your household too. So children, significant other, what have you. So take advantage of it. It's a really good employee benefit.
Perfect. Let me stop sharing here. One thing I forgot to mention with the finance stuff is I personally find it helpful to find like different financial gurus, for lack of a better word, just to like follow and look at occasionally. I really like Caleb Hammer on YouTube. The Money Guys are also really good. I know Dave Ramsey's super popular. And so just finding some model that resonates with you and just kind of checking in with that every now and then just to keep it fresh in your mind. But
yeah. Well, good. Looks like we have a little time for questions or comments. Again, if you have a helpful tip you want to share with the group, right? Either unmute yourself or send it in the chat.
Yeah, I like the DIY gift ideas from Pinterest. I always forget about Pinterest, but yeah, I bet they have some really amazing stuff on there.
I really liked the initial conversation, Dr. Wengel, you brought up about having that perfect Christmas or trying to set that holiday tone and how that kind of combines in with that financial well-being. And I find myself doing that every year. It's like, okay, last year I gave this, and this. And then I tell myself these words, I need to do that again or one up myself, right?
Yes.
It's something better where now, the conversation with myself is, no, I don't need to gift anything, a phone call or an email is probably good enough if I want to touch base with somebody and spread some holiday cheer, right?
That's
So
right.
no, I really appreciate that insight.
Well, that reminds me too. Thanks for saying that, Amy. That's great. Somewhere I just read too, somebody had a really helpful way of looking at it too. They said instead of aiming for the A+, Christmas or whatever, the Martha Stewart version or the Hallmark movie, A+. How about settling for an A-, maybe even a B+? That's okay. We're all high achievers. People in higher education, we're all high achievers, and all that, and that's great. But sometimes we kind of overdo it.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Does anyone else have any other comments or questions they would like to ask Dr. Wingles or Fisher? Again, you can put those in the chat or you can unmute yourself. Well, if you have anything, please feel free to put that in there. Drs. Wangels and Fisher, I just want to thank you so much for your time today, and just coming in, providing us some information and just reminders that, self-care isn't selfish, especially during the holiday season, and just providing us some of those tips on the financial mindfulness and spending. I will go ahead and put in the chat again, as we kind of talked a little bit earlier, our holiday social is next Thursday at the Blackberry Table. We're doing that donation drive for the Child Saving Institute. So we would love for you all to join us there. And then we'll also put in the chat a website to our UNMC EPP website. So if you enjoyed today's session and you are not currently a member and you're interested in joining, we have a membership link on there. If you sign up, you'll receive communication, our monthly communication, and then invites to special events like this. So if no one has anything else, just thank you again so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And I hope everyone has a wonderful holiday season.